Anna Voss had been a journalist for 7 years. She had covered wars, political scandals, and corporate collapses. She had never once killed a story. Not for money. Not for threats. Not for anything. But on a cold November night in a Manhattan ballroom, surrounded by 600 of New York's most powerful people, Anna watched something she was never supposed to see, and she made a decision that would unravel the next 3 years of her life. The Metropolitan Charity Gala was her assignment. Soft coverage. Smile, take notes, interview the mayor, write 500 words about the new children's hospital wing being funded by the city's elite. Her editor called it a breather. Anna called it a waste of her Thursday. She was wrong about that. She had stepped outside onto the terrace at 10:47 p.m. to escape the noise. The city spread below her in 1,000 lights, cold wind cutting through her red dress. She had her recorder in her clutch and a glass of water she hadn't touched. That was when she heard voices from the shadowed alcove 2 columns down. She didn't move toward them. She didn't need to. The night was quiet enough. The shipment moves Tuesday. Not Monday. Tell Reyes if he changes the route again, there won't be a conversation after that. A pause. Then, quieter, and clean up what happened in Newark. Tonight. Anna's hand tightened around her clutch. She turned her head just enough. The man speaking was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that fit like it was built for him. His back was mostly to her, but she caught his profile in the terrace light. Sharp jaw. Dark hair. A small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The man he was speaking to nodded once and disappeared through a side door. The tall man stood alone for a moment, rolling the cufflink on his right wrist, staring out at the city below. Then he turned. His eyes found her immediately. Like he'd known she was there the whole time. Anna didn't flinch. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked back at the city skyline as if she'd heard nothing. As if she was just another woman in a red dress getting fresh air. Her heart was beating in her throat. She took a slow sip of her water. He walked past her without a word. Close enough that she caught the faint scent of cedar and cold air. She didn't look at him. She waited until she heard the terrace door close behind him. Then she exhaled. Her hand was shaking slightly when she lowered her glass. Inside, she found his name on the event program. A discreet line near the back, under major donors. Caruso. Just the one name. A 7-figure contribution to the children's hospital. No photo, no company title, no biography. Just the name, printed in clean serif font like it belonged there and didn't need explaining. Anna was back at her desk by midnight. She opened a new document. She stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. The words were all there. The scene, the voices, the timing, the name. She had enough for a story that would run front page. She had enough to blow open an investigation. She had more than enough. She closed the document without typing a single word. She didn't sleep that night. She told herself she just needed more information before she published. That was the lie she chose. But even then, some quiet part of her knew it wasn't the real reason. And if you think this is the story of a woman who got scared and stayed silent, stay with me. Because what Anna did next had nothing to do with fear. And it would cost her more than she ever expected. Don't go anywhere, this is only the beginning. Caruso did not forget faces. It was one of the few things he was grateful for. He had built his world in New York on 2 things, knowing exactly who was dangerous and knowing exactly who was pretending not to be. The woman on the terrace was neither. She had heard enough to destroy him and she had looked at him like he was just a stranger in a nice suit. That was the part that stayed with him. Not fear, not recognition. Just a steady gaze, 2 seconds, and then nothing. His people identified her within 6 hours. Anna Voss, 31, senior investigative journalist at the New York Tribune. 7 years of bylines that had ended careers, triggered federal investigations, and twice forced congressional hearings. Her editor called her relentless. Her sources called her terrifyingly patient. Her ex-colleagues called her the woman who never killed a story. Caruso read her file in his car on Friday morning with his coffee going cold in his hand. He waited for the story to publish. He waited through Friday. Through the weekend. Through Monday's print edition and Tuesday's digital cycle. Nothing. Not a headline, not a buried paragraph, not even a vague reference to unnamed criminal activity at a charity event. He waited another week. Still nothing. Vincent, his most trusted man, sat across from him in the office on the 9th floor of his building in Midtown and said what they were both thinking. She's holding it. Why? Vincent had no answer. Neither did Caruso. He began watching her quietly. Not intrusively, not the way he watched threats. More like the way a person watches a puzzle they can't stop turning over. Anna Voss left her apartment building on West 82nd Street at 7:14 every morning. She took the subway, never a car, even in the rain. She bought black coffee from the same cart on the corner of 45th Street, always exact change, always a nod to the vendor but never a word. She ate lunch alone at her desk 3 days out of 5. She worked late. She ran in Riverside Park on weekends, even in November, even when the cold was the kind that made your lungs ache. She was writing 3 other stories simultaneously. A piece on corruption in the city's housing authority. An investigation into a pharmaceutical lobbying group. A profile of a Connecticut senator with a pattern of misused campaign funds. She was not coasting. She was not distracted. She was choosing, every single day, not to write the one story that would have defined her career. And Caruso couldn't understand it. On a Wednesday in late November, 3 weeks after the gala, he walked into the Tribune's lobby under a different name, as a source for a different reporter. It was a calculated risk and he knew it. He told himself it was reconnaissance. That he needed to understand her angle, find the leverage she was building toward, predict her move before she made it. He told himself a lot of things that week. He spotted her crossing the lobby with a coffee in each hand, a messenger bag sliding off her shoulder, her eyes on her phone. She nearly walked into him. She looked up. Her eyes landed on his face and something moved through them in a fraction of a second. Recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by a polite, distant expression. Sorry, she said, already moving around him. He stood in that lobby for longer than was reasonable. She didn't look back. He went back to his car. He sat there for 10 minutes thinking about the way recognition had flashed across her face and disappeared, like she had trained herself to make it disappear. Like she had been practicing for the moment she'd see him again. He had no idea how right he was about that. And he had no idea what was waiting for him 3 weeks later, when he finally stopped waiting and decided to find out for himself what Anna Voss wanted. He should have kept waiting. But Caruso had never been a patient man when something didn't make sense. That was his only real weakness. He just didn't know yet that it was about to become his greatest gift. Anna had a rule about sources. You protect them completely or not at all. She had made that rule at 24, fresh out of Columbia Journalism School, 2 weeks into her first real assignment. A warehouse worker in Brooklyn had trusted her with documents that exposed illegal dumping by a construction company tied to 3 city councilmen. She had protected his name with everything she had. The story ran. The councilmen were investigated. The worker kept his job, his family, his safety. That was the moment Anna understood what journalism was really for. Not the byline. Not the recognition. The protection. What nobody knew, not her editor, not her colleagues, not even her closest friend, was that on the night of the Metropolitan Gala, Anna hadn't just heard Caruso's voice in the dark. She had seen the face of the man he was speaking to. And she recognized him. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was a federal informant embedded in Caruso's operation for the past 18 months, placed there by a task force she had been quietly, carefully building a separate investigation around for 6 weeks. An investigation that was not yet published because it was not yet safe to publish. If she ran the Gala story, she burned Reyes. A federal informant, deep cover, whose cover was already fragile enough that his handler had called her 2 weeks before the gala and asked her, quietly and with great professional discomfort, to hold anything connected to that network for just a little longer. 6 more weeks, the handler had said. Maybe 8. Anna had agreed. She hadn't known then that 6 weeks later she would be standing on a terrace in the November cold watching the exact center of that network speak 6 feet away from her. She hadn't known the gala story would be the story. So she killed it. And she told herself it was professional judgment. Source protection. Standard practice. She was right. She was also not telling herself the complete truth, and she knew it. Because the part she kept coming back to, the part that had nothing to do with Daniel Reyes or the task force or source protection, was the 2 seconds on that terrace when Caruso had turned and found her eyes. And hadn't threatened her. Hadn't reached for a phone. Hadn't done anything except hold her gaze with an expression she could only describe as calm curiosity. Like he was deciding something. She had expected a visit from his people. A quiet suggestion that she reconsider her career goals. An envelope left somewhere. Instead, there was nothing. For 3 weeks, nothing. And then on a Wednesday morning in late November, she walked into her own lobby and nearly collided with him standing there like a piece of weather that had come inside. She felt his eyes on her back as she walked to the elevator. She did not turn around. She pressed the button for the 4th floor and stood very still while the doors closed. Then she let herself breathe. He was looking. She had known he would eventually. She had prepared for the threat version of this meeting. For the cold warning, the veiled danger, the careful reminder that men like him did not tolerate loose ends. What she had not prepared for was the way he had looked at her in the lobby. Not like a threat. Not like a problem. Like a question he had been trying to answer for weeks. She sat at her desk for 20 minutes before she could focus on anything else. Her editor stopped by at noon to ask how the housing authority piece was progressing. Fine, she said. Great, actually. Then she pulled up a blank document and typed 4 words in the middle of an empty page. Why didn't he move? She stared at it. Then she deleted it and got back to work. But the question didn't leave. It never really left after that. And 3 days later, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered, she heard the voice from the terrace again. Low, deliberate, and completely unsurprised that she picked up. I'm not calling to threaten you. His voice was the same as she remembered. Calm in a way that felt deliberate, like calm was something he had decided to be rather than something that came naturally. Anna was standing at her kitchen window, still in her coat, keys in her hand. She had been home for exactly 4 minutes. I know, she said. There was a pause. You know. If you were going to threaten me, you would have done it 3 weeks ago. Another pause, slightly longer. How long have you known who I am? Since the program listed the donors, Anna said. I knew the name. I had to look up the rest. And I decided it wasn't my story to write yet. The word yet sat between them for a moment. She heard him register it. Yet, he repeated. That's an interesting word. I'm a journalist. I choose my words carefully. Then what word would you use for what you're waiting for? Anna set her keys down on the counter. Her voice was very steady when she answered. The right time. He said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted, barely perceptible but real. I'd like to meet with you. That's not a good idea. I'm not asking for good ideas. I'm asking for a meeting. Anna looked out her kitchen window at the lights of the city below. 1 hour, she said. Public place. My choice. Of course, he said, as if he had expected nothing less. They met 3 days later at a small Portuguese cafe on the Upper West Side. She chose it because it was crowded enough for safety and quiet enough for conversation. She arrived 8 minutes early and chose a table near the back with a clear sightline to the door. When Caruso walked in, he scanned the room in exactly the same way she had. Their eyes met. Something almost like recognition, not of faces but of habit. He took off his coat before he sat down. The scar through his left eyebrow was more visible in the afternoon light. He was quieter in person than she had expected from everything she had learned about him. You're not what I expected, she said, because she had decided that honesty was the only strategy that made sense here. You're exactly what I expected, he replied. It wasn't a compliment and it wasn't an insult. It was just a fact. She found herself respecting it. He didn't ask her to kill the story permanently. That surprised her. He didn't offer money. Didn't reference what she stood to lose or gain. He asked her one question, and it was the last question she had anticipated. Why did you hesitate on the terrace? Not why didn't you publish? Not what do you want? Why did she hesitate? Because he had seen it. That fraction of a second before she recovered her composure, that tiny visible pause. He had read it from 15 feet away in low light, and he was still thinking about it weeks later. Anna looked at him. She thought about giving him the professional answer, the source protection rationale, the clean logical explanation that was also completely true. Instead she heard herself say, because you didn't look like someone who expected to be caught. He went very still. And usually when someone doesn't expect to be caught, there's a reason they've never had to be afraid of it before. I wanted to understand the reason before I wrote anything. He looked at her for a long time. Not the way men usually looked at her, measuring angles, calculating advantage. More like the way she looked at a story she hadn't found the center of yet. That's a very careful way to live, he said finally. You do the same thing, she replied. He didn't deny it. They sat in that cafe for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She didn't record the conversation. He noticed she didn't record it and didn't comment. She asked him 3 questions about his legitimate businesses, the real estate holdings, the import company, the investment fund, and he answered all 3 with a precision that told her he had been waiting for someone to ask them properly. When she left, she stood outside in the December cold and realized she had not thought about Daniel Reyes or the task force for the entirety of those 2 hours and 40 minutes. That terrified her more than anything else that had happened that month. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in January, slid under her apartment door sometime between 6 a.m. and when she came home at 8 p.m. It was a single page, no letterhead, no signature. 4 sentences. She knew about the terrace. She knew about the meeting at the cafe. She knew Anna had a source inside the operation. And if Anna published anything at all connected to that world, the source would not survive it. Anna read it 3 times standing in her hallway with her coat still on. Then she sat on the floor with her back against the wall and thought with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, the way she always thought when something was bad enough to require her full stillness. It wasn't from Caruso. She knew his rhythm by now, the careful distance he kept, the precision of his communication. This was from someone else. Someone inside. Someone who had been watching her meetings and didn't want the story buried. They wanted it weaponized. They wanted her to write something specific, something that would expose Reyes not by protecting him but by using him. Someone who knew enough about her investigation to know exactly which wire to pull. She had 2 choices. Disappear quietly and let the story die completely. Or walk directly into the only person in New York who might be able to tell her who sent the letter before it was too late to matter. She called Caruso at 11 that night. He answered on the 2nd ring. She told him about the letter without softening a single word. There was a silence on his end that she had learned to read. This one was short and cold. Where are you? My apartment. Don't open the door for anyone until I call you back. I'm not going to, Anna. It was the first time he had said her name. She stopped talking. Don't open the door. He called back in 40 minutes. The letter had come from a man named Ellis, a mid-level figure in a competing network who had been quietly feeding information to a political contact to engineer a specific story that would collapse Caruso's operation and take down the federal task force along with it. 2 birds with 1 journalist. Caruso's people had identified him before midnight. He would not be a problem after tonight, he said. Not in any permanent way, he added, before she could ask. But he would be removed from the equation. Anna sat in her living room in the dark for a long time after the call ended. She thought about Daniel Reyes, who was still alive and still embedded and still doing the work that would eventually result in the story she had been holding. She thought about the task force handler who had asked her to wait. She thought about the rule she had made at 24 about protecting sources completely or not at all. Then she thought about the way Caruso had said her name, just once, like he had been holding it for a while before using it. She thought about that for longer than the other things. The next morning she called her editor and told him the housing authority piece was ready. It ran on Thursday. It was the best work she had ever produced and had nothing to do with Caruso or anyone connected to him. But when she filed it, sitting at her desk at midnight with the city humming 9 floors below her window, her phone buzzed once. A message from a number she recognized now. Good piece today. She stared at it for a moment. She typed back, you read my work. His response came after a pause, I read everything you write. Always have. She put her phone face down on her desk and finished her coffee and told herself, firmly and completely and with great professional conviction, that this was not becoming something. She was wrong about that too. He asked her one night in February, in the second year of whatever this was that they had become to each other, why she had really kept the secret. They were in her apartment. She had made pasta with the last of the groceries she hadn't gotten around to replacing, and he had eaten 2 servings without commenting on the quality, which she had interpreted correctly as a compliment. He was sitting on her couch with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, reading through a document she had left on the coffee table, which was an invasion of privacy she was choosing to address later. She was in the kitchen with her back to him when he asked it, quiet and without any particular urgency, like it was a question he had been comfortable holding for a long time and had finally decided to set down. She didn't answer immediately. She finished drying the bowl in her hands. She set it on the counter and turned around. He was looking at her, not with urgency but with the full patient attention she had come to understand was his version of vulnerability, the only version he had. The full answer, she said, is that I knew about Reyes and I was protecting the source. That's part of the answer, he said. She crossed her arms. Yes. What's the rest? Anna leaned against the kitchen counter. She looked at him sitting in the low light of her living room, this man who had walked through 3 years of her life with the careful deliberate weight of someone who understood the value of what he was walking through. The rest, she said slowly, is that when you turned on that terrace and found me, you looked like someone who was tired. He held her gaze. Tired of what? Tired of being the thing other people were afraid of. Something moved across his face that she didn't have a word for yet. And that made you want to protect me? It made me want to understand you, she said. Which is the same thing for me. The room was very quiet. You could have written the story 100 times, he said. It would have been the best story of your career. I know. You chose not to. I chose differently, she corrected. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, with the particular quietness that she now knew was as close as he came to undone, I've spent 3 years wondering why. I know, she said again, softer this time. You've been terrible at hiding it. He stood up. He crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet away from her and looked at her in the way he had looked at her since that terrace, like a question he had been turning over for years and had finally found the last piece to. Anna. Just her name. Like the first time, but completely different from the first time. She held his gaze. The story comes out eventually, she said. I know, he said. I've known for a while. And? He reached out and took the dish towel from her hand and set it on the counter beside her. And I'd rather be next to you when it does than spend another 3 years wondering. She let out a breath that felt like it had been held for a very long time. That's not exactly romantic, she said. No, he agreed. But it's true. She looked at him. I'm going to write it honestly. All of it. No softening. I wouldn't want it any other way. And you can't interfere with the process. I understand. Or read my drafts without permission. He almost smiled. Almost. That one might be harder. For the first time in 3 years, Anna Voss laughed in front of Caruso. Completely and without thinking about it. And he stood there watching her like a man who had just found the answer to the only question that had ever mattered to him. The story published on a Thursday in March. It was the most important investigation of Anna's career. It was honest, complete, and devastating in exactly the right ways. It protected every source. It exposed every truth. It changed things. And every night that week, when she finally got home late and the city was quiet and the apartment was dark, there was black coffee on her counter that she hadn't made herself. And a note that said nothing except, "Good work today." She kept every one of them. She never told him that. He knew anyway. If you made it this far, you already know, some stories don't end. They begin. Twice. If you want more, you know what to do.